let me say, a word in defense of reason in dialogue with faith.
Because faith is that proof. Faith unites us to that substance.
But reason, in order to realize its full potential, needs the horizons revealed by and truths contained in the faith. And not just any faith, but the Catholic faith. Now, what is Catholic social teaching? This is the more academic part of the lecture. Among the things that the Church's teaching is that it is not a plan of economic or political policy. I'll reiterate this in a number of ways as I go on, but there's a great deal of confusion on this matter. All too often in the heat of a partisan political debate about which good people may have differing opinions and feel very strongly about, efforts are made sometimes in that context to proof text from various documents of the magisterium, utilizing the Church's teaching to reinforce one or another political policy under debate. And yet I think we need to be very careful here. To jump so seamlessly from the magisterium's insistence, for example, on the fundamental and non-negotiable moral obligation to the poor, which is part of the irreformable core social doctrine of the Church, to jump from that to specifics that are contingent in policy debates, things that are prudential, and form legislation, political legislation, I think is wholly unjustified to jump so seamlessly from the core to the prudential applications of the core. The American bishops, in their own pastoral letter in 1986, wrote, Economic Justice for All, wrote the following, quote, "There are also many specific points upon which men and women of goodwill may disagree. We look for a fruitful exchange among differing viewpoints," close quote. Significant in this regard also is the teaching of Blessed John the 23rd in his encyclical letter Mater et Magistra, when he said, quote, "When it comes to reducing these teachings to action, it sometimes happens that even sincere Catholic men have differing views. When this occurs, they should take care to have and to show mutual esteem and regard, and to explore the extent to which they can work in cooperating among themselves," close quote. That's 238 in Mater et Magistra. And then there is the passage in Pope Benedict's most recent social encyclical, Caritas in Veritate, where he says in number 9, "The Church does not have technical solutions to offer," close quote. All too often, many Catholic academicians, theologians, priests, even bishops, and supposed advocates of social justice do not appear to understand the distinctions the Church herself makes between fundamental, non-negotiable dogmas and doctrines and the prudential and debatable give and take when it comes to applying these principles of Catholic social teaching to the real world. Here one need only consult the compendium of the Catholic Church, of Catholic social teaching, in which we read, "The Church's magisterium does not wish to exercise political power or eliminate the freedom of opinion of Catholics regarding contingent questions," close quote. That's number 571. The specifics of, say, any given year's national budget ought to reflect an accurate and economically well-informed way of proposing how to achieve the worthy goals of, for instance, tending to the vulnerable, creating a sense of prosperity in a society. It is not sufficient to merely state that one's goals reflect a preferential option for the poor, especially when the legislation that is conjured up is in reality a demonstration of a preferential option for the state, for bureaucracy. A common error often assumes that concern for the economically weak and marginalized must somehow translate first into yet another government program. That assumption is wrong, And it flies in the face of another principle of Catholic social teaching, the principle of subsidiarity. With good reason, this is something that those on the Catholic left, or whatever remains of it these days, rarely mention or grapple with, because they know that it would raise many questions about the prudence of any number of, for instance, welfare programs that they support. Too often encyclicals, especially social encyclicals, are read as standalone documents and not within the broader sweep and longer tradition of Catholic social teaching, which does not, of course, begin, as I said at the outset, with Rerum Novarum, but rather goes back to the gospel of Jesus Christ himself. In a real sense, the Church's social doctrine might better be said to be pre-political, in that it seeks to form the varied stances and policies, not of the Church, but of her faithful, in their own political commitments, within their own vocation as lay people active in the world, and within the sphere of their own particular capacities. And it might likewise be said to transcend politics, because unlike politics, whose goal is to develop prudential policy prescriptions, the Church's telos, the Church's end, the Church's ultimate goal in her social doctrine is nothing short of human redemption itself. It is true that various social encyclicals have come closer to underscoring the validity of one or more particular policy positions than others. That is partly the reflection of the times in which they are written, partly a reflection of the fact that certain teachings of the Church, such as the absolute condemnation of particular acts, I give you abortion, or its conviction that a given political system such as communism is by its very nature, and cannot by its very nature help but violate human dignity. These translate more clearly and more directly into specific policy positions. No Catholic, for example, can be a communist, because to be a communist in the true sense of the word is to be a materialist. And no Catholic can support laws that promote contra-life policies. But aside from these kinds of issues where there is a direct intrinsic evil to the act, and these are relatively few in number, Catholics can enjoy an enormous scope of prudential judgment when it comes to their actions in the sphere of politics, economics, and society. No Catholic can intentionally ever choose to do evil. But when it comes to doing good, Catholics enjoy an enormous latitude. The Church's teaching in the moral realm, of which her social teaching is merely one aspect, is one consistent body of thought. It is not a hodgepodge of policy concerns among which Catholics can pick and choose along the lines of the fashionable Catholic cafeteria Catholicism. The Church's solicitude for the poor, the marginalized, the unborn, the elderly are all of a piece. A Catholic cannot subordinate justice issues to life issues. He must embrace the Church's teaching as a whole, simply because life issues are justice issues. Yet the distinction holds. This is not because social justice or justice issues are less important than life issues, but because they are fundamentally different. A difference rooted in 2 millennia of Catholic moral reflection. Abortion involves the direct and intentional destruction of an innocent human life. It is never permissible intentionally to choose that evil. Laws that permit abortion are thus inherently unjust, and Catholics are obligated to work toward the legal prohibition of abortion. When it comes, however, to doing good, which is what addressing poverty entails, the Church does not stipulate exactly how such good is to be accomplished. Helping the poor requires a different sort of moral analysis, not because I am, or because the Church is dualistic or schizophrenic, as some critics might suggest, nor because assisting the poor is less important than protecting the unborn, but because the two issues possess different characteristics and therefore require different sorts of moral analysis. This distinction holds, for example, outside the realm of the Church's social teaching, and can be seen in her teaching on the moral manner in which life itself is conceived. A superficial criticism of the Church's stance, for instance, against artificial contraception says, why is it wrong to avoid contraception by the use of chemicals or condoms, but not immoral when using natural family planning methods? Think about that. The error in this argument is the same one made by the critics to whom I'm responding. In the former case, an evil means is being chosen, the action to chemically prevent conception, for example, rather than refraining from doing a good at a particular time, that is, the actions leading to conception. It is not a sin to refrain from choosing from all of the many goods that are available at a given time. It is always a sin to intentionally choose to do evil. To my mind, Pope Benedict XVI is perhaps the Pope who, since the beginning of modern Catholic social teaching, has been most explicit about this point. When we look, for instance, at Caritas in Veritate, there are many suggestions offered about the good we can do. But the Pope is very careful not to frame any of them in terms that suggest that every Catholic must wholeheartedly embrace them. For a Pope who is so often caricatured by those within the Church and outside of the Church alike for being authoritarian, isn't it strange how respectful Pope Benedict is of the legitimate freedom enjoyed by lay Catholics when they do good? At the outset of Caritas in Veritate, as I said at the beginning, I quoted this at the beginning, the Pope says the Church does not have technical solutions to offer and does not claim to interfere in any way in the policy of states. Number 9. None of this is to say that the Church is guilty of Karl Marx's accusation, namely that it acts as a kind of an anesthetist to lull people into a malaise as to their social deprivation, their social condition, thus impeding what for him was an innate revolutionary impulse in the hearts of all workers. This is not what the Church is about. Rather, by her very constitution, rooted in the incarnation of the Son of God, the Church seeks to point to the things that truly matter from the standpoint of man's salvation. And here I would argue we discover a key to understanding Benedict XVI's approach to social, political, and economic issues in Caritas in Veritate. But also we find it in Deus Caritas Est and Spe Salvi, his two previous encyclicals. His emphasis in all three of these encyclicals has been on deepening the theological dimension of the Church's social teaching, not only by focusing upon the scriptural dimension, but also the writings of the Church Fathers, preeminently St. Augustine, as well as some of the giants of 20th century Catholicism, such as the late Cardinal Henri de Lubac. What does the truth of Christian love tell us, for example, about how we treat our brothers and sisters in need? It tells us that we recognize poverty as more than simply a material phenomenon. Man is a moral and a spiritual being as well as a physical being, as I said at the outset, and thus also at risk of moral and spiritual poverty. The same attention to love tells us that because man is made free, it is a mistake to undermine and suffocate his freedom in the name of love. It is not an act of solidarity to try and take over the lives of those in need, even if we think it is for their betterment. The approach of the Church, as the Second Vatican Council teaches us, is not to impose the truth upon society, but to propose it to society. A true act of solidarity is to assist the person in need to the extent that they need such help, so as to avoid reducing them to a state of dependency. This is an especially powerful theme in Deus Caritas Est, and is echoed many times in Caritatis in Veritate. Likewise, the Christian conception of hope, so profoundly studied in Spe Salvi, but also mentioned many times in Caritas in Veritate is a counsel against both utopianism and despair. Both mindsets are perpetual temptations for Catholics working in the world, and both reflect a diminishment of faith in the power of God. To be utopian is to assume that we can build a world in which the effects of human fallibility are abolished, which is, of course, impossible. But to despair is to give up on the redemptive power of the Lord working in and through history, precisely through the choices and actions of human beings to transform the world so that it comes closer to the transforming vision that we find in the Gospels. By bringing these and other Christian theological themes to bear upon the social dilemmas that confront people in their daily lives, Benedict is reminding us of what truly makes the Catholic approach distinctive. Yes, it is true that the natural law tradition continues to exert a profound influence upon Catholic social teaching. That is the contribution of natural reason. But reason, in order to realize its full potential, needs the horizons revealed by and truths contained in the faith. And not just any faith, but the Catholic faith. In that sense, Caritas in Veritate and Benedict XVI's other encyclicals are very consistent with the theological project of Joseph Ratzinger, which is to renew the Church by going back to the sources of Christian revelation. In conclusion, in the period after the Second Vatican Council, there was perhaps too much deference to what the world, quote unquote, had to say about any number of political, economic, and social questions. The Church has, of course, always affirmed the truth that is discovered and knowable by natural and social sciences. But in the end, all these things and their ultimate significance can only be fully grasped with regard to that which comes through Christian revelation.